Nintendo makes incredible games. Some of their very best were made decades ago. They're now considered classics. But Nintendo is failing to make these games officially available for everyone to play. They once led the industry in accessibility. Now they're not so much. This is where game compilations have filled in the gaps. Instead of dumping them on some sort of service, these companies have made their own games accessible direct from them, and I couldn't be happier. There's a huge variety ranging from the Atari all the way up to the current generation. It's amazing how many have been released. Game compilations have been around for a long time. Nintendo was making them way back on the Game Boy and Super Nintendo, giving people a way to play their older games on the latest hardware. That's still going on today. In fact, game compilations seem more prevalent than ever, and for good reason. Those retro games are still great. Having them officially released means that they are very easy to access, either digitally or physically. Some of the compilations that have been released during this generation don't always consist of retro games. Some of them are current games bundled with the previous entry, helping bring players up to speed in the series. Most of these compilations are on multiple platforms. I'm going to cover them on the Switch because that's the console I'm currently playing. These are some of the very best games that have ever been made. Some of them are from the earlier days of gaming. Others are from, well, a not-so-distant past. The Bioshock games are incredible. The original was a breath of fresh air when it released in 2007. I had never seen anything in its style before. I couldn't get over how amazing it looked and played. The opening is one of the most impactful in all of gaming for me. You're on an airplane in the year 1960, when all of a sudden, the screen goes black and the only sounds are of the plane going down into the ocean. The Bioshock logo slowly appears out of the black as if it were just pulled out of the water. You wake up under the ocean's surface, watching passengers' belongings and luggage drift into the abyss. You start swimming to the surface where you're surrounded by the plane's wreckage engulfed in fire. It's chaos. As you swim away, you see the tail of the plane sticking out of the water, slowly sinking, which draws your eye to a tower, a solid structure in the middle of the ocean. Having no choice, you swim to the tower onto the staircase, where you find your way to a door which you go into. When you enter, the doors close behind you and the lights turn on automatically. An uneasy feeling starts to develop. You find small clues about where you are. A giant bust with a banner and a plaque that gives insight to the structure's creator. Everything's in an Art Deco style from the 1940s, which lends to the uneasiness. As you follow the steps downward, you come to an elevator, which you have no other choice but to go inside. It takes your character down into the ocean. This opening sets up the entire game. It's one of the greatest openings in any video game in existence. Being alone, stranded in the middle of the ocean, seeing some sort of salvation against all odds. It's a place you need to survive that seems unreal, but could really exist. What's worse, swimming alone in the ocean, or braving whatever it is at the end of that elevator ride? It kind of felt like a Myst game, surreal in a way that everything looked. It stuck with me throughout all these years. It's by far one of the best games I played during that generation. To my amazement, a sequel came out. I didn't know it was even a thought until I saw it sitting on a store shelf. I immediately bought it without knowing a thing about it. To my surprise, you play as one of the most terrifying bad guys in all of gaming. It was so awesome playing the part of one of the big daddies. Being able to play in the same environment in a different role really made this game fun for me. I've played it quite a few times and enjoyed every one of those playthroughs. The third game came out and flipped the entire script. Instead of being underwater, you play suspended in the sky. What an awesome take on the series. I hadn't played this game until a few years ago, and I ended up liking it a lot. You can get all three of these games in one package. The amount of entertainment this one compilation includes can't be understood unless you've played the games. Each one is different, but they all fit into the same world. It can't be understated how amazing the Konami Anniversary Collections are. These games are incredibly important to gaming history. They are part of the foundation gaming is built on. For a long time, some of these games were inaccessible. Yes, you could always emulate them, but like I've said before, I travel for work and I don't always carry a device with an emulator on it. I like to pack light, which means I bring a console and that's what I use for the whole trip. That's usually my 3DS or my Switch. For the past while, it's been the Switch. For the longest time, Konami chose Super C to represent the Contra series. The Wii, Wii U, and 3DS Virtual Consoles all had it available to purchase. The NES Classic Edition also had Super C on it. The biggest question I always asked was, why not Contra? Contra seems to be more popular. Everyone I knew had it. I was the only person I knew with Super C, and that's because I bought it from a garage sale for a few dollars and recognized the C as the same C on the Contra logo. I wasn't even aware it was a sequel. Super C is a good game, but I think Contra is more beloved. I have always wanted to revisit Contra, but the only way I could find to officially play it was on the actual cartridge or on Contra 4 for the DS as an unlockable. I never unlocked it. Contra 4 is a tough game. I ended up emulating it and called it good. That is, until the clouds parted and gave me exactly what I was looking for and more. The Contra Anniversary Collection was released with that elusive original game. No longer was I regulated to just emulating it on a separate device. I could now play it on my Switch, the place where the majority of the games I'm currently playing are. Not only is the original game on this compilation, so are all the other amazing games in the series, along with arcade and Japanese versions of Contra. The Japanese version has some amazing background animations and cutscenes that kinda blew me away. I have played the North American version many times. It was great to see another version of it. The European releases are also here. They're called Probotector and Super Probotector Alien Rebels. That way you can play as a robot and not a human. The excellent Genesis entry, Hardcores, is here as well, along with the superb Game Boy game Operation C. It plays just like the console games. It's incredible how good it is for a Game Boy game. But this wasn't the only compilation to come out from Konami. They also released the Castlevania Anniversary Collection. This one really got me excited because I had never played a Castlevania game. I started a few, but never seriously got into them. But now I always had all 3 NES games, Super Castlevania 4 for the Super Nintendo, Castlevania Bloodlines for the Genesis, 2 of the Game Boy games, and Kid Dracula that had never been released in English until this compilation came out, with me at all times. I started playing the first game, and I'm loving it. I've also played a good portion of Castlevania 4. I can't wait to see what the next games have in store for me. But that's not the end of the story for the Castlevania series, because there's another compilation. It's amazing how many Castlevania games there are. The Game Boy Advance got 3 of them, and the Castlevania Advance Collection has all 3 on it. I've played a good amount of Harmony of Dissonance and I loved it. These other 2, Circle of the Moon and Aria of Sorrow, look to be of similar quality. But there's another game on the compilation that stands out, Castlevania Dracula X for the Super Nintendo. This game is a reimagining of Rondo of Blood, which was a PC Engine game. I've played it and I thought it was a fun entry. Its inclusion is a little odd amongst the GBA games, but I see why it's here. There needed to be another game to make it worth the money. And what better game than the one that's very expensive on the used market? This one's a unique collection because it has the handheld games on it. You just don't see many of them released. There's also another collection that Konami released, the Arcade Anniversary Collection. This has various arcade classics on it. The one I was most interested in playing was Salamander. Being a big fan of Life Force on the NES, Salamander is the original version of that game. It's cool to see where the game originated. There are also 7 other games on it. These Konami Anniversary Collections are an incredible value. I've seen them for sale for $4 each. They were already incredibly priced at $20, but $4 is an absolute steal. The best part of all these collections is that they've all been given a physical release. I bought them digitally before I knew they were going to come out physically, though that hasn't deterred me from getting the physical copies. I've been able to get both versions of the Contra and Castlevania collections. I bought the Advance collection from Limited Run, so I'm guessing I'll see it show up in a couple of years. I missed out on the arcade collection, but I'm not beating myself up over the loss. I'm sure I'll find it someday. If you want to play some of the very best games throughout the early years of gaming, I'd highly recommend all these collections. One of the most surprising compilations to ever come out is the Ninja Turtles Cowabunga collection. With Nickelodeon owning the Ninja Turtles and Konami being the developer, I thought there would be no way those games would ever officially release again. Though I shouldn't have been so close-minded. Turtles in Time and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were given their own arcade 1-up, which should have tipped me off that the licensing wasn't impossible to get around. And it wasn't. These games are fantastic, with the crown jewel being Turtles in Time for the Super Nintendo. It's an all-time great and might be the best beat-em-up of all time, at least in some people's eyes. I had fun with it as a kid, and I've had a ball with it now, but that's just the headliner. There are 13 Ninja Turtle games in the lineup, which range from the NES, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, arcade originals, and even a couple Game Boy games. I like seeing the difference between the 2 versions of Turtles in Time. The arcade game looks a bit better and moves smoother from what I've noticed. It's great being able to play a version of a game that I already loved in a new way. The same goes for the Genesis game, Hyperstone Heist. I had always wondered what it was like. It's really close to Turtles in Time, but it is different. I like the change in music and sound effects. The Genesis always catches me off guard with how it sounds. I like it, but it's vastly different from what I'm used to with the Super Nintendo. The original NES game is really good and doesn't deserve to be as looked down as it is. I went back and played through it on this collection and had a great time. It wasn't easy and lived up to its reputation as being one of the more difficult games of the era. The other 2 NES games are also on here. I used to love renting the arcade port from our local video store. It was always fun playing through that first stage where you square off with Rocksteady at the end of it. What an intro to a game. I also picked up the Game Boy games a few years ago and had a go with them on my Game Boy Advance SP. It's been fun revisiting them on here. This compilation ranks very high for me. It's incredible how much value is on it. This is probably one of the very best compilations you can buy. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 were insanely influential on me growing up. Besides playing video games, I was into other things including skateboarding. It just so happened that this game came out right when I was into it. I would play this game, then live out a real-world version of it. Of course, it wasn't to the exaggerated heights it was presented in, but it was a connection I had that improved my life. I got better at skateboarding because I was playing these games, which inspired me to go outside my young self's comfort zone. I learned trick names from playing these games, but me and my friends would pull off tricks that we didn't know how to proper name. We learned them from the Tony Hawk games. I grew up in a very small town. We didn't have a skate shop to get skateboards and skate videos. The first skate videos I watched were the ones at the end of the game's career mode for each skater. They blew my mind. The Rodney Mullen video in particular was unbelievable. We would always play as Rodney Mullen just to watch his video. I got the first game for Christmas and I fell in love with it. It's one of the few games I still have from my childhood. I had played other extreme sports games like Cool Borders 2, but the first Tony Hawk game was on another tier. It was so much better than anything else like it. For some reason in my youth, I wouldn't search the game aisles in the stores. I just didn't think my parents would buy me a game on any given day. I was never aware of any new games being released, especially sequels. I missed out on so many of them. One of those was Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. I found out about it at school when I overheard someone talking about it with their friend. Hearing that there was a follow-up to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater got me really excited. I don't remember when I got it exactly, but I do remember playing it to death. It's superior in almost every way to the original. I was so into these games and skateboarding at the time. My parents surprised me by taking me out to the big city where Tony Hawk was doing Vert and Street with Shaun White. It was unbelievable. You can guess how I felt when it was announced that these games were getting remade and put on modern consoles. I picked up the PS4 version first. It felt right at the time. I'd played both the original games on the PlayStation back in the day. Since the controller has barely changed since then, I felt right at home with the controls. I was absolutely thrilled when I found out that the Switch was getting a port of this compilation. It plays really well on it too. Having these two amazing games on the go with me is really great. I've sunk a good amount of time with both games over the years on various consoles, including the Switch. This one, I can't recommend more. There are 3 Mario games I never got into. Those happen to be the first 3 3D Mario games. I switched over to the PlayStation when the PS1 released. I skipped the entire N64 library as well as the GameCubes. I just didn't have the budget to get the Nintendo consoles along with the PS1 and PS2, so I didn't play them. I also moved out of the country for a few years before I got back into gaming with the Xbox 360. I didn't play another Nintendo game until I came across Donkey Kong Country Returns sitting on a store shelf one day. I picked it up along with a Wii and a few other games like New Super Mario Bros. Wii, Mario Kart Wii, and Mario Galaxy. I liked how Mario Galaxy looked and played, but I didn't continue playing it, and I really don't have a good answer as to why I put it down. I remember being really excited to play through all the Nintendo games I'd missed out on. I imagine I started other games, and that took up the time I usually spend for gaming. Somehow Galaxy fell through the cracks and I never picked it back up. With that in mind, having all 3 Mario games I had never played together in a collection was almost tailor-made for me. It felt like somebody knew my backstory and said, "Hey, this one's for you." I've finally been able to play these games and do it with the console that's already hooked up to my TV. I don't have to track down the cartridge and discs and also figure out how to hook up these old consoles to my modern TV. I can also take it with me anywhere I go and get game time whenever I have a free minute. I like that some of these games can be played with the controller they were designed to be played with. Mario 64 and Mario Sunshine can be played with their respective controllers, those being the N64 controller Nintendo made for the online service and a GameCube controller through an adapter. That's a really nice feature. The Wii gets the shaft, but I think the Joy-Cons do an okay job, though you can play it with many different control types. This collection isn't perfect. Some of the games on here might not be the best games I've ever played, but I'm glad I was given the opportunity to do so. And I don't like how it was given a limited release. You can't buy it anymore. The digital version was delisted, and the physical copies are out of print. You can get used and maybe new copies on the secondhand market, but that's pretty much your only option now. I guess that's just the world we're living in now. limited first-party game releases. I like this collection specifically for the ease of having 3 3D Mario games in one spot. If you can track this one down for a good price, it's worth picking up. Some of the best games you can play have been compiled together in little convenient collections. With the Wii Virtual Console being a thing of the past, it's been amazing to see developers take it into their own hands by putting their past games on modern consoles. These games deserve to be played and not forgotten. By making them available, it helps get them out to people who otherwise wouldn't go through the trouble to play them. Though, it's also good to see current games bundled together with their past entries. Catching up on what happened previously makes playing newer games better. There are other ways to play all these games, some for free and others cost a lot of money. These compilations are convenient and accessible. And that's how playing a game should be.